Okay, welcome everybody to Lunar Alchemy. My name is John, here with Bella, of course, and today we are going to be discussing the transit through gate 12, the archetype of the prophet. And as if you're following along in the gene keys, you'll see the shadow of vanity moving to the city of purity. And it is the way of discrimination. So I'm excited to talk about this one. This is a very unique energy, I think, in terms of the mechanics and how it functions in our system. Also, it brings us to what we might call the penultimate shadow, the shadow that never lets go until the entire Siddhic state has been achieved, so to speak. So, Bella, before I pose the question that's on my mind, I wanted to just ask you what your thoughts are around this gene key, around this archetype, around this transit. What's feeling alive for you? Because when we were discussing what we wanted to do today, you mentioned that some of the energies that are alive with this transit are moving into what we're doing now. So I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, where I feel called or moved right now is in the magnetism of the full moon tomorrow, that is going to be in that opposition between the 12 and the 11, and the beautiful geometry of the 11 and the 12. So they are made up of the trigrams of earth and the trigrams of heaven. And here we could speak about I actually almost want to show the picture, but I think that the geometry of the elements where I would like to start, but I don't know if we want to start there, but really they are interplaying. I'm going to show it and we don't have to go into it right away, but this is, here we have the 12 on the top and we have the 11 on the end. So the 12 is the heaven over earth, and then in the 11, we have earth on the top and heaven on the bottom. So this is where the sun and the earth are right now, and they're different. One is separating to come together, and one is kind of coming together to become something different. And that I think is super, super interesting. So that's what I feel, more than kind of going to the place of saying, what is discrimination? Why is it so hard to discriminate? Why do we have to close the heart as human beings? How is that going to make us, vain? I mean, I guess because I've spoken so much about the gene key in the past, that I more feel like with you today, I would like to dive in on an alchemical level. I feel I even have hard to kind of find words, but it is to come back to that essence, definitely for me with the 12, is the purity of heart. And I think having it opposite of the 11th, it can happen through all the archetypes. I mean, these are the most prime elements, the yin and the yang is what we have here. And we could say we have the sun and the moon. When we look at the creative, it's the sun. It's that principle of light. And then we have the earth. It's dark. It's the womb space. They are coming together here right now. And having the moon and the sun in those trigrams of the moon and the sun, the earth and the heaven, it is definitely a powerful time we're in. And it feels more than anything that it's the time we're in, not just, I feel like the full moon tomorrow is just highlighting the themes. This is the themes of the time right now, not only for this full moon, but it's just highlighting what's alive.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you wanted to start with that, because it feels like a more rich area for discussion and exploration. When we see those trigrams of the heaven over earth and the 12, what the sun is basically shining at us all day, and and what the moon will be reflecting to us, even though the moon will be positioned in alignment with gate 11. The movement of energy, the yang, it moves outward. So that heaven is moving up, and the receptive, or the earth, is moving down and inwards. So what we're having is this separation of the creation. And this is where our entire, I mean, it's such an interesting topic, because in some ways, this is where our individuality begins. And also, in a sense, with the city of purity, it's where it also ends. And this gene key 12 is one of the stop codons, along with the other two that are a part of the ring of trials. And what's significant about that in terms of an evolutionary development is that when we have these separation elements of yin and yang, it's almost as if there's a movement of evolution that is kind of moving away from the existence of what has been in the past. And that stop codon puts a clear demarcation between the past and what is to be in the present. And so this energy it's mysterious as well as powerful. And even in this 12th gene key, there's a secondary codon ring that's within the ring of trials, and that's with the gene key 12, the ring of secrets. And I'm very, I don't think that the ring of secrets is there for us to attempt to unlock with our mental reasoning or anything along those lines. But I'm curious about how, Bella, how you see this gene key 12 is like the final, it's the ultimate one in this ring of trials. It's the final trial for humanity to move through. In fact, it suggests that in this evolution from shadow to cities across all of them, that this is the last shadow that will exist within humanity before essentially humanity is no longer what we would define as humanity. So I guess I'm curious for your reflection on how this pathway evolves through us and moves with us as both a force of evolution, a force of transformation, and how it might be functioning within us that we're maybe not yet aware of, or not conscious of, at least, anyways.
For me, the 12 is very connected to remaining humble. And I feel like it is connected to our fear of becoming humiliated, because we know that purity is the heart that is open, that is pure. And I feel maybe that our biggest fear is the fear of humiliation more than anything else. So I feel like we have a little bit of a misunderstanding in the shadow frequency between being humble and being humiliated. And that is what I feel like this 12th gene key is asking us to purify, is asking us to take care of that residue so that we can be humble and not equate that with like putting ourselves up for humiliation. And if we look at the things that stay with us for life, maybe the things that tend to kind of be those things that we have a hard time letting go of or forgiving, it often includes some kind of humiliation. That's often where we grab on and we can't let it go. So that feels very present right now for this key for me.
Yeah, that really resonates to me with the energy of this key, because as I was looking into this sort of archetypal energy, I realized that perhaps the ultimate key to this quality is refinement. And an unrefined version of humility is humiliation. If you try to humiliate someone who is truly humble, it becomes humorous, because that energy, that low frequency of humiliation, just really, it can't reach someone who has a true level of humility. And of course, humility is one of the cities, is it not? I can't remember the number on that.
It is for the 31. So leadership, humility.
Yes. So from that true level of humility, humiliation is just sort of, it's humorous, because it's entrenched in aspects of self that are recognized to be not really who we are or what we are, or that deeper inner purity of the heart in terms of recognition of self, which I think within the purity, the recognition of other and self no longer even exists to the heart. So when I was thinking about this archetype, I was thinking about refinement and like, what are the activities of what human activities are primarily focused upon refinement. And I thought about a craftsman or an artisan is constantly refining their work. But there's this emotional quality to this gene key as well that is not quite so strictly defined. There's wildness in this one as well, because it's not just heaven, it's also the earth and the wildness of the earth and nature doing its thing at the same time. So I feel this very like it's almost like a tension in this particular gene key that is bringing up this moment where humanity is at, where we are clearly defining ourselves as individuals and yet moving in the direction of seeing ourselves as a collective. There's so many people who are in a state of like, well, what is it that we're seeking? It's some form of collective unity in our experience. And it feels like a tremendous tension that is kind of being exerted on our ego structures, on our societal structures in so many ways that maybe we haven't quite been as accustomed to over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, as our individuality is becoming more and more refined. So I'm not sure if that leads us towards a specific focus or just a specific awareness, or quite what we look at from that standpoint. I sort of, this is one of those gene keys where I kind of feel like there's nothing to do, in relation to it, other than to continue using our capacity for discrimination and or our awareness to recognize what is for us and what is not for us. I don't know if you have a different idea about that, Bella, around thoughts, emotions, feelings, the things that are happening for us, and how we can move with it in harmony.
What stayed with me when you said the word refinement, it is refinement. I can definitely see that, and how to purify that. Maybe the last part of the vanity feels like it's always going to be there. That would be refinement. And I feel like we could have a little brush, like a toothbrush, and doing it forever, because there's always going to be a little bit of residue of vanity. Like, we're human. So for me, I see that perspective, and I also see the simplification. Somehow here, at the end of the day, the pure heart is the heart of a child. So there is no refinement. It's already there. The purity of the heart is how it was in its original state. And somehow here, it takes me to the fact that we are, in a way, in the right placements. So if you think of having heaven on the top and earth beyond, so going back again to those to the preview of the I Ching. So here we have earth on the bottom, and we have heaven on top. So somehow they are where they are, and we could say, yeah, they can go, diverging. They can go apart, but it's, in a way, it's a standstill. Everything is in its place somehow. And I'm wondering as well, discrimination is fresh orientation. So if we have yin and yang, or heaven and earth here, and really what we want to do, and what I think that we're learning to do, is to orient in a fresh way when it comes to these polarities inside of us, when it comes to these polarities between us in gender, for example, which we have been speaking about quite a lot here with sacred union and things like that. So it's fresh. What does it mean every day to have the heaven and the earth in the creation of receptivity, one for the other? And I feel like here, when we look at it too, the difference from what's on the other side, so with the full moon, is that when we have heaven on the bottom and earth on the top, they cannot help but merging. So here we see the mystical union of heaven and earth, because they are kind of flipped. And I thought the other thing, which is also like a bit out there, but I feel like all of you that are on the call right now are already so versed in the actual gene key. So it doesn't come natural for me to speak about it. I just thought that this one was beautiful too. When you have everything in the right place, which is this, the sun shining on us, and then the moon, she's kind of in the dark, or the earth is on the bottom, the earth and the moon, the feminine, and then the masculine is on the top. Well, then we can take a break. We can pause. We can recuperate. So here it's like relax and recuperate. And we're dreaming so that we can separate, but we're separating so that we can unify. So separate in order to unite worlds is what it says here from this I Ching translation. So to separate in order to unite worlds. And this is dreaming, actually. But you can see here, the big picture of it is this one. So it's like, it's relaxing, because we have everything in its right order. And here it's funny too. This is the symbol for it. So a square on the bottom, and so I guess earth element on the bottom, or something like that, and then the sun on top. I don't know what it means really.
Yeah, those are the essentially the alchemical symbols for wholeness, heaven, and the square is the earth, the four directions, essentially. So that's a very interesting take on this particular one. It seems that there's so much so many different directions that one could go. When I was considering like what archetypes feels very much alive in this particular one, I ended up finally at the poet as the one who refines the emotional experience of life into this refined expression that obviously we know poetry as written on paper, but it feels most alive to me when it's spoken into sound. The cadence of the poetry, one of the greatest poets since the Renaissance, Shakespeare. It is rich on the page, but when you see a Shakespearean play, the words and the rhythm of those words take a new meaning when it's acted out in front of you. And it kind of made me thinking about that within this context makes me kind of think about like, oh, there's this within that dreaming context, it really kind of points again to that state of contemplation to some degree, but it has the activity of expressing it along the way. I wonder, Bella, if there's elements from human design connecting from the throat to the solar plexus that kind of brings this energy to a more, because right now, thinking about it, I feel like there's nothing, which is so funny because, of course, the title of this gene key, the subtitle is being swallowed by the void. You're kind of lose your individuality in the death towards the void without, and then there's kind of this rebirth into a new state of being. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that particular channel or from human design that kind of brings this into something that obviously we're all in a process, but it's a process that I feel as if you can't grab anything. It's like there's nothing to it. And I wonder if there's anything in the human design that you can point to that gives us something a little bit more concrete.
Yeah, I feel like I keep hearing certain words that you are mentioning and they stay with me. So now you are saying poet. And I was wondering in myself if that is the archetype, because you know how many times we've spoken about that those archetype names are something that we starting playing with 3 years ago, and now it seems like they are evolving, and I'm not actually having the possibility this year to even go back to them and update them. So we have been speaking about some of the names, and so I was wondering between the poet and then the prophet, which is what we named it. And I feel it's important here. For me, a poet would maybe more be the programming partner, the 11, because a poet is just using, in a way, inspiration or idealism or fantasy. Like a poet, you can build with emotion, you can build with words, you build a whole word with, how much you can feel into a poem. And for me, the prophet is much more about speaking the truth, whatever that's going to lead to. And of course, we could say truth is subjective or whatever, but it feels like when it comes to the 11, it is the gate of caution, because it's very cautious with, what it speaks, because when it speaks, it wants it to be pure, it wants it to be truth. That feels as a first important kind of discernment, this throat gate that wants to speak truth. And when truth comes out, it's not poetry. It's kind of like, again, there's not so much to it. It's not so much around it. It's just truth. And that would take us then to that channel where it's connecting to the emotional center, which again, that's a little bit like the 11 that's very out there. It's the Sagittarius gate, and it's kind of makes everything bigger. Well, we are in the 22 in the emotional center. It's also kind of like can overflow in the emotional waves of everything. So here we could say it's about emotional truth. This channel is definitely about emotional truth. how do we bring everything that we're working with in the emotional center? How do we bring that through a pure, in a pure expression, without cutting anybody's throat, without slaughtering anyone with our ways? Like, how do we do that as human beings? And we were on a transit call just before, and several people were saying, knowing how you can almost like be outside of yourself, looking at the energy of that truth speaker, but that's actually cutting the other. That's not actually connecting hearts and uniting, and not actually separating or discriminating in order to come together, but separating in order to kind of leave it that. Exactly.
Yeah. I actually, and I feel, that's interesting. That's an interesting take on the prophet that hadn't really like occurred to me, because no idea of the prophet really brought any understanding. For whatever reason, I connect the prophet as a channel that doesn't go down to the emotional center, but goes up to the divine centers, and as a conduit for truth that comes from above rather than truth that comes from below. And that's an interesting take, though, to share about that. And
where we are, John, too, with a lot of what we're doing with Lunar Alchemy too, through the transmissions, we are purifying that awareness center. We have been animals, and it was a lot about the spleen awareness, the instinctive awareness, the reptile brain instincts, and then our ajna, or our reasoning. It's also how we have survived. And now it's really about purifying that whole emotional center, where we have all these Pisces gates. We have the reaction, we have the weakness, the victimization, the desire, like all these very dense states or frequencies are there. And that's where we are working. And if we don't work at that level, physical body, emotional body, these more like lower, we could say, I don't believe that we can be a vessel for anything, because it's gonna be clogged. It's gonna be seen through the filter, or felt through the filter of what's not purified. And that's where we are. And interesting, when I say that, I feel the codon ring of purification, the 30 and the 13 as well, coming in. So they feel definitely connected to that process as well, and that it is in relationship with the other. And I guess that's where the 1222 can also sometimes feel a bit strange, because it's individual truth or emotion being expressed in purity, individual circuitry. And at the same time, it's there to touch the other. And that's what Ra and Richard says. There is probably no channel that comes in with such a beauty and, kind of promise of unity, or the pain of non-unity. If you think about all the, what it is that poetry and drama and the things that really touches are about. It is individual, but it's definitely here to empower others, which, like we have it all the individual circuitry. It's here to touch the other in such a profound way.
Yeah, see, that quality is where I lose track of the prophet, is that the purity of the heart is about touching another, and not as an other, but as self. And it's so interesting, when we look at the heart of the child at stages of the development that we are as children, there is actually very little separation of individuality, depending on the age and the development of the child that we were, or the child that we're assisting coming into the world. At very particularly earlier points, there is no recognition of self and other. It's just self, and the innocence of the child heart comes through in that. And so there's so much that happens to us in this process of separation, and the aloneness that we experience if we're sort of like focusing more downward and inward into that state, as well as the expansion into higher possibilities that takes us away, you know, like those forms of elitism or malice that come up in the shadow, and the high art of discrimination that comes through in the gift, or when you get to the city of purity, then it's like being swallowed by the void. There is no longer even individuality there. And this particular gene key, oftentimes I see this flow between the shadows and the gifts and the city. But here it's almost like there's a stop in between each stage, and there's nothing that is taken with it into the next. Although, of course, you know, I guess in this case, that vanity kind of hangs on throughout until there's nothing. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about that element of stop codon that is influencing all of these qualities, that is kind of making it hard to wrap our minds around, because of course the vanity does hang on. There isn't a full stop in between. And are we just having kind of this, is there just a disconnect happening in the mental level of our understanding of these things, or what's bringing this kind of feeling of that separation happening when we're thinking about, okay, well, our emotional center going into our throat, or our manifestation center, that feels so, to me, that feels like this incredible expressive potential. And I sort of wonder if you have a point on, or a thought about that brings it into a different awareness.
Yeah, we'll go back to the simplicity of it. You know, where's the end place? If love is the most potent force, energy in this universe, then the end station must be the purity of that love, the purity of that heart. And here it's speaking about the answer on an individual level, individual circuitry. It starts with your heart. It starts with each one of us coming back to the innocence. And at the end of the day, I believe that's what it is. What else? Like, once you're back to innocence, isn't that the whole, like, wherever we look in the Bible, we look in any kind of prophecy, that's, we come back to our innocence. Whether we want to say that we are going to be purified of our sins, or however we speak about it. But for me, if we are speaking about Christ as the prophet, or Mary Magdalene, or, you know, them together, because we are speaking about the sun and the earth, or the sky and the earth, we are speaking about those polarities it takes to create that mystical union. And for me, reading Mary's gospel and those parts that I feel of the Bible that haven't really been exposed, it's all about the purity of heart. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that has even been misunderstood, speaking about the 22 with the other cheek. I saw also in the chat, you know, mm-hmm. we have been conditioned to believe that when they dishonor you, put the other cheek. But more than that, when we're more than speaking about when it went wrong and what do we do when it went wrong, like, this jinky is much more fundamental. It's before it was ever wrong, and that's where we're going back to. And that's like where everything, the whole matrix exists at the same time. It's not even a timeline, or when are we going to go into having the mass of this planet have more purity and the non-purity in the heart. No, it's all existing at the same time. It's all already written, and it's back to that 0 point of the purity of the heart. And that's the, you know, it's not the goal, it's the state that we are rediscovering and remembering.
somehow I just love what you just shared, Bella, in such a profound way. And I would love to just express an almost humorous degree of vanity that I could express through kind of the embodiment that I brought with today, which is the sort of like, I'm wearing the browns of the soil and the earth. And then if you look at the top of my hair, like it's sort of like zipping up towards the heavens, right? Or in as much as this particular arrangement of hair is a designation from the yogis that is designed to kind of like reach the heavens, the energy of what's up above. And it sort of like struck me as this hilarity of vanity that comes through. And in all that you're discussing about the purity of the heart, it just, I feel like that separation and that that aspect was really brought into such a lovely kind of a description through what you were sharing in that. And it's just such an incredible quality when we bring that awareness. And I think perhaps too, this particular energy has that it has that quality of, when we go deep into the heart from a mystical standpoint, we find there is a quality of nothingness in there that is untouchable when the ultimate refinement happens, where that individual kind of disappears into the void of death through that space. I mean, it just feels like there's such an sort of a mystical element to this particular quality. And I don't know, do you have any kind of final, I feel like what you shared was such a beautiful stop, but I'm curious if you have any final thoughts before we discuss what comes through in this transmission that we will be moving into here shortly.
Yeah, this is the play of creation and love, right? So creation is heaven and love is earth. So here, that's what we can go back to. Are you creating with love? Are you making love with creation? It goes back to some very powerful simplicity of what we are made up of. We are creation. And what are we infusing that creation with?
Yeah, that feels like a very powerful stop for our contemplation at this stage of our discussion. And I really, it's so interesting when you're bringing in those elements of the prophet as Jesus or Mary Magdalene. I often think of Muhammad, the prophet, which kind of brings in a different quality, but perhaps what you're sharing from that purity of the heart brings a different way of understanding all of those qualities together and bringing in that purity of the heart. And I really appreciate where it lends itself toward this transmission that we're going to jump into very shortly here, because when we have this yang heaven over the yin earth, we have been brought into a place where the feeling of this movement comes to us through the elements of air. And air, as we know, is, you can't touch, you can't even hardly at the most refined level of it. It's not really something that can be touched, but it has all of these qualities of movement that it brings into our experience. And that's going to be a large aspect. And as you were speaking about it, Bella, it struck me that within that movement of heart, it brings us into this deeper experience of self that drives us forward along the path that our genetic makeup has brought us to express. And it's so interesting, because our whole discussion and my entire feeling about it is this like untouchable nature, this thing that you can't grasp with your body or your mind. And I think that's what's really kind of gonna come up and come through from this transmission, as we move into that as a possibility for transformation. So I'm seeing, Bella, you're processing, like all of these things while we're speaking, and it's just such an interesting, like, here we are, you and I, you have the two so strongly, and all of the things that you've been processing through, and here I am focusing on what can be brought from that higher stage to bring into that element of our bodies. How can we bring that? And it just I don't know if there's sort of a more perfect embodiment of this energy kind of moving through, but I'm excited about this quality of this transmission to come through and see how it feels for all of us through the body.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. And we'll meet in the next container, right? For those of you that are inside the membership.
We'll complete our discussion here and move with our members to the transmission portion. So
thank you.
We'll see you all next week in another discussion. Please feel free to join us in membership to experience the transmissions every week, and we will look forward to that very shortly. So we'll see you soon.